After the EU sanctions against Russia failed to yield the desired results, the EU is now training its guns on Central Asia in a bid to stop sanctioned goods reaching Russia. But after anti-Russia sanctions failed, will such empty threats do the miracle for EU? Hi and welcome to TFIGlobal, the foreign affairs and geopolitical analysis arm of the TFI Media Group. I'm your host Vedika. Let's begin with the video report. After the EU sanctions against Russia failed to yield the desired results, the EU is now training its guns on Central Asia in a bid to stop sanctioned goods reaching Russia. The EU relied on 4 countries in Central Asia, namely Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkey, and China, to end their dependence on Russia and cooperate with the EU to isolate Russia. However, these 4 countries have continued to maintain ties with Russia and is also helping it to dodge sanctions against Russia. Now, a fuming EU may target these 4 nations with new measures to stop them from throwing a lifeline to Russia. The EU's reliance on Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkey, and China was seen as a strategic move to isolate Russia. These countries were seen as potential allies who could reduce their dependence on Russia and instead cooperate with the EU in tightening the noose around Russia's neck. However, the reality has been very different. For instance, countries like Kazakhstan has increased manyfold its re-export to Russia. There are reports that Kazakhstan sent to Russia $184 million worth of shipments of different high-tech products, even though the country doesn't produce these goods. The EU's reliance on these countries was based on the assumption that these countries would be willing to reduce their dependence on Russia and cooperate with the EU. However, this assumption has been proven wrong, and the EU is now struggling to find ways to isolate Russia. The EU has been imposing various sanctions on Moscow in recent years, but these sanctions have not been able to produce any desired effect. In fact, these sanctions have backfired on the EU as Moscow retaliated and cut gas supplies to Europe. Now the EU is targeting Central Asia with new measures to stop them from throwing a lifeline to Russia. As per a report, Central Asian countries such as Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan are the most likely first targets of a radical new EU proposal to stop Russia busting sanctions by importing the high-tech components required to wage war through its neighbors. The proposal, which is part of the 11th sanction package against Russia, seeks to target persons and entities circumventing the Union's restrictive measures by restricting European companies from selling sensitive goods to Russia's neighbors if there is circumvention. The proposal does not name any specific countries or products, leaving that decision up to EU countries. However, some EU countries fear the proposal may open a Pandora's box and lead to targeting of bigger trade partners such as China and Turkey. The US has been pushing for a more hawkish approach on China, but the EU is reluctant to further alienate Beijing. Turkey is also seen as a major political risk given the volatility of its politics and its leverage on issues like migration. The proposal is expected to receive feedback from EU ambassadors, and the EU does not expect a deal on the package until next week or even the week after. The EU diplomats are correct in cautioning the EU that measures against such significant geostrategic trade partners risked backfiring. Thus, it is now time for Europe to wake up and smell the coffee. The new EU proposal looks like a desperate attempt to force Central Asia in obeying EU diktats and trying to punish them for doing so. It's almost comical how the EU keeps doubling down on the same failed strategy, like a gambler who keeps batting on the same losing horse. It's safe to say that the EU's attempts to sanction Russia have been an utter failure, and these new threats will likely be no different. It's time for EU to accept the reality and not try too hard to control other countries.